What is going on, guys? I am Paul Ryan, your host of the ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us. And to our regular listeners, welcome back. With me, as always, is my co-host, the best co-host in the world, Dave Pigskin Papers Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing all right, Paul. Ready for another exciting week of NFL football. We got baseball playoffs, hockey starting. It's a good time of year for sports. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Dave. Before we get into it, my friend, did any of your baseball teams make the playoffs?
No, I'm a Mets fan, and it was
Okay.
for the Mets and the Yankees. It's like a Mets fan, Yankees hater, but it was quite the season. That's a lot of money that was spent for basically fourth place teams or wherever they both finished. It was pretty depressing. Uh,
Well, as
how about you? Are you a Texas Rangers fan?
Yeah, I was about to say, as a Rangers fan, thank you for Max Scherzer, and thank Jacob Degrom is to be determined, of course. But
Right.
man, I'm as a Rangers fan, I'm very excited.
Well, one little fun stat for you, Paul, is that the on Sunday the Rangers outscored the Cowboys 11-10. But we'll get
Oh
into that a
man,
little later. We'll get into football a little later, but I thought you'd like that little stat.
well, you definitely won stat of the week. I'll tell you that, Dave. All right, well, Dave, before we get into our discussion tonight, let the people know they can find you on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. I am at Pigskin Papers. Both of those P's are capitalized, and I post most of my content on Twitter. And you can also get at it at my website, thepigskinpapers.com. And at some point tomorrow, I'll have my weekly fantasy preview, which has starts and sits and sleepers and matchup analysis and all that kind of good stuff. And I post a waiver wire column usually by halftime of the Monday night game. Paul, where can people find you on Twitter, and where can they get at content you're working on these days?
Yes, sir, guys. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15, and all of my content can either be found on Twitter or on YouTube.
All right, excellent. Well, Paul, this is the 99th show of the ATB Fantasy Show, and I can't say that I've been here for all 99. I'm guessing that this is about my 20th show, maybe, in partnership with you. I started as a guest, and then we started co-hosting. But for you, this is exciting. Almost 100 shows, so congrats on that. It's not easy to do a podcast like this for that long and keep coming up with fresh material and guests and things to talk about. Maybe if we could just spend a minute, because I've actually never asked you this, and I'm curious about it. How did you start this show? And what do you remember maybe from like your first ever show? And what year was it that you started?
All right. Well, first of all, I want to say thanks, David. It's been a wild ride, man. And to think I'm almost at 100 shows is kind of crazy. The show actually started with a company by the name of Across the Board Sports, and unfortunately, the Across the Board Sports they're no longer around. At the time when they reached out to me. I was going to be the head of all things fantasy for that company, and um, it's been kind of cool because some members have gone on to do some cool things. Some have gone on to do cool things with fantasy, creating fantasy content. Other things just kind of went on to do just cool things in life. Outside of that, but how the show got started is, of course, I was running a fantasy team, and we had a group of writers, and a couple of the guys have always said that they were interested in doing a podcast, and we like chopping it up with each other or talking to each other. So we decided to give it a go. As far as what I remember about the first show, man, I'll be honest, I don't remember much. I will say I've had a lot of good memories doing the show, a lot of laughs, a lot of drinks, a lot of late nights, and a little bit of fantasy talk mixed in there somewhere. But I would like to say, Dave, I've enjoyed working with you and look forward to continuing working with you. 100 episodes isn't possible without you and all of your hard work.
Oh, that's awesome to hear, Paul. Thank you. And now I finally know what ATB stands for. I always wondered, and for some reason, I never asked you. So it's across the board, which I like. I like that name. But right back at you. It's really fun getting after it on NFL and fantasy related matters with you. And I've really enjoyed doing the show. And I think it's made me a better fantasy analyst. Having to kind of dive into the stats and think about what I'm going to say and prepare for this show. has definitely helped me in writing my columns each week. And it works out well that we do this show Wednesday night, and then I go and write my weekly fantasy column. I've sort of already thought about the matchups and the slate of games, so it's helpful.
I would agree. I think, recording fantasy, you kind of take a deep dive into players and stats and games and things like that. It also helps you be a better fantasy player, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I got two teams. The two teams I care about, both off to very good starts this year, but it's a long season, man. It really is. When I started playing fantasy, it was 16 games. It's only one game longer, but a lot happens. That's what we learn each week. Things change. Jamar Chase had 0 touchdowns coming into this last week. Now he's got 3. It's just things change quickly, and it is a long season, and that's why, after the first week, people panic. Think that someone who they spent a lot of draft capital on, who had one bad game, and it happened to be in week 1, that they wasted a pick, and you learn over time that it is a long season, but it's not that long. You can't fall into too big of a hole. So we're kind of getting at that point in the season where, if you're 1-4, you kind of have to get a win this week.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. And a team that really needed a win was the Raiders. Here on Monday night, and the Raiders were able to get that win. But you look at Josh McDaniels in this offense, and looking at that fourth quarter with his fourth down decisions in the final 2 minutes of the game. What were your thoughts on those?
I mean, I couldn't believe it. And when the announcers are just straight up faulting a coach for a fourth down decision, it's a bad decision.
Yeah.
And that's not the first time this season. He's had like 2 or 3 really bad head scratchers. And look, the Raiders went on to win the game, but they basically needed a yard to win the game. And even if they went for it and didn't convert, the Packers have to go longer than they'd have to go off a missed field goal. And even if you make the field goal, you're giving them the ball back. And it was an over a 50-yard field goal. It was just a dumb decision. You got Josh Jacobs, you got Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers. You got to be able to get a yard. And if you get the yard, the game's over. So it was just mind-boggling. And like I said, when the announcers are saying, this is not even saying like, oh, this is a close one. They were just like, this is wrong. And I'm sure everyone else was like me, just kind of screaming at their TV, like, what are you doing? But he got away with it. His defense came up with an interception, when the Packers got the ball back. What were you thinking? It was just head scratching, like I said.
Well, on Monday nights, Dave, I actually have my my podcast, my Cowboys podcast. So I rarely get to watch the game, and then in the second half, I didn't get to watch the game either because correct me if I'm wrong. I know that the games are still on ESPN. I don't have cable.
Ah, okay. Well, we got to get you some cable so you don't miss the Monday night game.
Yeah, that's the goal, man.
Jordan Love kind of came down to earth a little bit in this game. He had played pretty well, especially from a fantasy perspective, a little more so than from a straight up NFL perspective. But had a rough game. He was 16 of 30 for 182 yards, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions against not a great defense. Max Crosby was really like in his face all game, so that was part of it. But any concerns with him going forward? This is really like he's a 4th-year player. He was in the same draft as Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert and Tua and Jalen Hurts, who we've seen, a lot of over the last 3 seasons. We've barely seen Jordan Love. We're finally seeing him for the first time. Any concerns either from an NFL or a fantasy standpoint as you think about him as a quarterback now?
Well, I know on paper the Raiders' defense has been pretty bad, Dave, but they face some stiff competition. You look at their schedule, they face Buffalo, Pittsburgh, who has a good defense and can do some things on offense despite Matt Canada most of the time. And then, of course, the Chargers, and they lost all of those games by single digits, which I found somewhat impressive. I'm not really that worried about Jordan Love after this performance. This is his first year, and games like this are bound to happen. That being said, I know that the Green Bay Packers, they have some issues on that offensive line, which could be a concern moving forward. But this performance doesn't make me want to panic on Jordan Love.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is he was out without Aaron Jones, again. And Aaron Jones is a dynamic playmaker who can really help a quarterback because he's such a good pass catcher, in addition to being a good runner. And all his pass catchers, all his like main tight ends and receivers are like under 24 years old, or they're 24 and younger. So it's a really inexperienced group. His two main receivers, Watson and Dobbs, are second-year players. Musgrave's a rookie. So in Jordan Love's defense, even though he's kind of a veteran who just hasn't played that much, it's a really young pass catching core. So I just need to see more from him. But this week was definitely a bit of a step in the wrong direction for him.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. Dave, a team that's really having a great start to the season is the Detroit Lions, and they're at 4-1. Looking at the rest of the NFC North, that division is under 500. Is this NFC North division already decided?
I think it is. I mean, there's a lot of season left, and obviously, the Lions they already have a bunch of injuries, and you can never say that anything's a done deal because, like, even the Chiefs, you could say, well, have they already won the AFC West? Which they haven't. I mean, the Chargers are 2-2, but if Patrick Mahomes, I'm not wishing this on anyone, but if he had a serious injury, the division's not over, and the same is true with the Lions if they lost, a couple of key players. But the NFC North is not a good division. The Vikings are a lot worse than they were last year. All that magic of winning the close games isn't happening for them. Their defense is pretty suspect. The Bears are, not ready to compete. And the Packers are a young team that's learning. I mean, they're well coached, and I think the Packers will be somewhere around a 500 team. I think the Lions are going to win 11 or 12 games, probably, maybe, given that they don't have that hard a schedule, maybe more than that. So, yeah, I think the Lions, when I look around the entire NFL, I think they have the least competition of good teams in their division. So I think that they're pretty safely ahead, even though it's only week 6. What do you think about that? Do you think there's going to be a challenge to them in that NFC North?
I don't want to say there's going to be a challenge for them to lose the division. I do think the Bears, of all the teams in that division, could make some noise. Maybe beating the Lions in, I don't want to say a meaningless game, but in a game that's doesn't decide the division, but kind of a cost a game maybe for playoff standings or something like that. But I feel like the Bears are starting to turn a corner, and they're the team that I think could make some noise. But yeah, like you, I think this division is the Lions to lose.
Excellent. All right. Well, we added a new segment 3 weeks ago. Our teams, where we talk about the team I root for, the Miami Dolphins, the team you root for, the Dallas Cowboys. And every week we've done this. This is the third week. One of our teams won and the other one lost. We haven't had both of them winning the same week or both of them losing. This week it was the Cowboys' turn to lose. They were obviously playing a much better team than the Dolphins were playing, and they were on the road and Miami was at home. But this was kind of a measuring stick game for Dallas, I think. The 49ers have knocked them out of the playoffs each of the last 2 years. Dallas went up there and just got whooped. They kind of got beat in every phase of the game, lost 42-10, which is pretty lopsided. What did you learn about the Cowboys this week, or what did you take away from that game?
Dave, it was just a flat-out embarrassing game to watch. That performance on Sunday night. Well, what I learned about the Cowboys is the offense is in need of a lot of work, and the Cowboys, man, they're not an elite team like I thought they were.
Yeah, that's kind of, it's only one game, and the Niners can make anybody look really bad if they're kind of clicking.
Yeah.
And we'll talk more about this game when we get into some of our weekly awards, I'm suspecting. But, I try not to overreact too much from 1 week, but it's always disappointing. I mean, I felt the same way kind of about the Dolphins last week when they went to play the Bills, who were in their own division and just kind of got, punched right in the mouth. The good news is it's early in the season. The Cowboys have a lot of talented players, and they can learn from this game and hopefully start to execute a little better. But, and they'll have 2 games against the Eagles, which, is another excellent team that's on their schedule. So more to be learned about the Cowboys. But, I thought their defense would play better. I'm not surprised their offense struggled against that 49ers defense. But their offense really, they turned the ball over a lot and just didn't have a lot of sustained drives. CeeDee Lamb was kind of invisible for much of the game. The Niners kind of took him away and dared the Cowboys to find other guys who could beat them, and they couldn't really come up with that. So it's one game, it is what it is.
The Niners found a way to take CeeDee Lamb out of the game, and also found a way to take Micah Parsons out of the game, which obviously had an effect on the defense.
Yeah.
So, Miami, they handled the Giants, but had issues with turnovers. What are your takeaways from their 31-16 win over Big Blue?
Well, if Miami was playing a good team, they might have lost that game. You turn the ball over 3 times, and they were bad. One of them was a 14-point swing kind of turnover. The Dolphins were on like the 3-yard line, and Tua threw a pick 6. So you think you're going in right before the half to be up by, double digits, and instead you throw a pick 6. The Giants get their first half touchdown of the entire season, and it's a defensive touchdown, but it's a touchdown nonetheless. And for a second, that game was close. Then Miami, I think it was the first possession of the second half, and, the Giants foolishly put like a rookie cornerback on Tyreek Hill with no help over the top, and it was a very quick, almost 70-yard touchdown, and the Dolphins were off and running. But they allowed the Giants to – the game was never really in doubt, but they allowed them to hang around with sloppy turnovers and some penalties and things like that. So, they won the game, and they won it convincingly, so I'm happy with that. Losing Devon Achane, and they didn't even mention during the game that there was anything wrong with him. I think it was something that maybe started bothering him during the game. I still don't even know what the injury is, but he's on IR. Is kind of a big loss for them. Just the way he was playing he was such a game changer. When he would come in, it was almost like having a basketball player who comes off the bench for you and scores like 15 points in a quarter, and just like helps you pull ahead. So we'll see how they do without him. They're kind of they have the Eagles in week 7, but they're kind of in an easier stretch of their schedule. So we'll see, but I was happy they won. It just wasn't the cleanest or crispest game from them. And against better teams, they're going to have to, make fewer mistakes.
Yeah.
So, sorry, Paul.
No, you're good.
Moving on to the next part of the show sheet. So it's time to do our weekly power rankings. We started this last week, and obviously these are going to change every week.
Right.
As we watch NFL teams beat each other. So we won't spend too much time on this, but just give me your top 10 for this week. And if there's 1 or 2 teams that moved a lot for you, maybe just mention, like your biggest riser or biggest faller, if you can.
Definitely my biggest faller is going to be Dallas, and my biggest riser, I'm going to say, is going to be Detroit. Number 1, San Francisco. That's pretty easy. Number 2, Philadelphia. Number 3, Detroit. Number 4, the Kansas City Chiefs. Number 5, the Buffalo Bills. Number 6, the Miami Dolphins. Number 7, the Dallas Cowboys, which I don't know, that could still be maybe too high. Number 8, the Seattle Seahawks. Number 9, the Jacksonville Jaguars. And then number 10, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. How about you, Dave?
We have a really similar list, actually, and including a bunch of teams in the same slots. My biggest riser is the Jaguars, just because they weren't in my top 10 coming into this week. And I think the Cowboys are my biggest faller because I had them 4th. and I dropped them all the way down to ninth. So my list is the 49ers first, the Eagles second, the Chiefs third, the Lions fourth, the Bills fifth, and the Dolphins sixth. So the only thing different in our lists in the top six is you had Detroit 3, Kansas City 4, and I have Kansas City 3 and Detroit 4. Then I've got Seattle 7, Jacksonville 8, Dallas 9, and the Ravens 10. And I almost gave number 10 to the Bucks, but I think the Ravens 9 times out of 10 they win that game against Pittsburgh, and we'll talk about that game as we get further into it. So let's move on to some of our players and teams of the week, which is always one of my favorite segments of the show.
Yes, sir.
We'll do AFC and NFC. Paul, you go first. Which player from each conference is your performer of the week?
So NFC, I mean, this is a pretty easy pick, if I must say so myself, Dave. Justin Fields, the fantasy QB1 for the week. No turnovers, 4 touchdown passes, and his first win of the season. That was a good game on Thursday night by the Bears there. Pretty exciting victory for them. And then the AFC, I mean, come on. Jamar Chase. He broke the Bengals single-game receptions record with 15, had 3 touchdowns, and somehow he was still the wide receiver 2 for the week. Kind of crazy to think of that, but he had a great performance. It was nice to see him bounce back. Dave, how about you? Give us your AFC and NFC performance of the week.
Yep, I like your picks. I tried to pick guys who put up big numbers, but also played against good defenses.
Okay, I like
and
that.
So I have no overlap with you. I have 2 different guys. NFC, I'm going with Brock Purdy, who just like Justin Fields had 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. His usual. He hasn't thrown a pick this year. Actually, he and CJ Stroud are the only starters who've started all their team's games who haven't thrown a pick yet. And it wasn't just the numbers he put up. He was threading the needle. I mean, he was just hitting guys in the right place. He was making good decisions. That Dallas defense, I know they didn't really get a lot of heat on him like I expected them to, but that's a good defense, and he just carved them up. Obviously, look, he's got elite skill position players, and Shanahan draws up a scheme that, that sets him up to succeed, but you still got to make the throws. I'm not comparing Brock Purdy to Tom Brady, but people used to kind of knock Brady just saying it's the system. He's just set up. He's just set up to succeed. And that's true. But you still got to execute. And, Purdy, I mean, there was one sequence, I don't know if you remember this, but Purdy threw like a perfect pass to Brandon Ayuk. It was like a 30-yard gain, and they called holding. So it came back, and then he just threw another like perfect 30-yard pass to Deebo Samuel and got the first down anyway. And that's when I was like, I could turn this game off.
Yeah,
like he's just on his game, and I was really impressed with him. This was the first time I kind of watched him, and I was like, he may be more than just a system quarterback. Like, he's actually really good.
Yeah.
So he's my NFC player of the week. My AFC player of the week is Travis Etienne. He had close to 200 total yards. I think he had 136 on the ground, 48 through the air. And more than that, he had like 30 touches. I remember when he came out, they were kind of saying like, well, maybe he's sort of more of a third down back. And remember, they had James Robinson, and they were kind of using him. I mean, first he missed his rookie year with the torn Achilles. And then the beginning of last year, he was kind of being used as like a third down back. People were wondering if he could handle a heavy workload and run between the tackles. And he was the difference in that game. Trevor Lawrence didn't have a great game. Jaguars played really good defense, but by giving the ball to Travis Etienne as much as they did, and by him being successful moving the chains, they kind of kept the Bills off the field a little bit. He also scored 2 touchdowns, so close to 200 yards and 2 touchdowns against a really good Buffalo defense. He gets my AFC player of the week, and we have to call up these players and tell them they won an award on the ATB fantasy show so that they can we'll send them a new car or something.
Dave, call me crazy. I'm pretty sure all those guys are watching the show right now.
100%. 100%. What else are they watching on? I mean, the Phillies blew out the Braves. I mean, what are they watching?
Yes, sir. Well, Dave, with studs, there's always duds. Give us your AFC and NFC Week 5 duds.
Yeah, my AFC dud is the entire Ravens offense. The Steelers can be a good defense, but the Ravens only scored 10 points. I think they had 3 turnovers, an interception and 2 fumbles, multiple drops. I mean, I've seen the highlights of a whole bunch of dropped passes and just poor execution. 5 drops? Yeah. So lots of drops, turnovers. They only scored 10 points. A game they should have won, a team they're better than. So they're my dud of the week. My NFC dud of the week, and cover your ears, Dallas, but I'm giving it to Dak Prescott. Those were 3 bad interceptions. Well, 2 of them were bad. But nonetheless, he just didn't get the job done. He hasn't had the big Dak game yet this year, like the one he had against Tampa in the playoffs last year. And I'm sure that game is coming. Maybe we get it this week against the Chargers. The Cowboys are in prime time again. So the good news is they have a chance to bounce back. Of course, they're going up against Kellen Moore, but that'll be interesting.
Absolutely, yeah.
But in any case, Dak gets my dud of the week. That was just not a good performance by him. Who are your duds of the week in each conference, Paul?
Well, Dave, after working together for at least 20 episodes or more, I think we're starting to learn a little bit more about each other than what we think. Because the NFC dud of the week for me is the Dallas Cowboys offense. I mean, they had less than 200 total yards of offense as a team. That's pathetic. And then the AFC dud of the week is the Baltimore Ravens wide receivers. They had 5 drops for the game, 1 being in the end zone.
Yeah, and just so the audience knows, Brock Purdy, I know you're out there. Travis Etienne, I know you're listening. We do not share our answers before the show. So
yeah,
I don't know who Paul's going to say. Paul doesn't know who I'm going to say. And sometimes we have the same answers, and that's fine. That's good that great minds think alike. But,
exactly.
on the studs of the week, we had different answers. So it goes back and forth. What player or team for you was the biggest surprise this week?
Yeah, I'll have to go with Mr. Desmond Ridder, man.
That's my guy too. See, here we go, Paul.
Are you serious?
Yeah. That's who I got
written
down. Well, you go. You go. Tell me why you said him, and I'll probably have next to nothing to add. So go ahead.
Against the Jacksonville Jaguars, he had a rough Week 4 loss in performance. But Week 5, Ridder came out slinging the ball for over 300 yards. He had 2 total touchdowns, and he led the way to a big victory against a good team in the Houston Texans. I was surprised. I thought Texans were going to win that game pretty easily.
Yeah, I had the same thoughts. I was sort of like, where did that game come from? And, he got Kyle Pitts involved. Jonnu Smith was still involved.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting that maybe not that interesting. They added Van Jefferson during the week. So maybe they're going to start throwing the ball a little more. I guess with Kupp coming back and with Atwell and Nakua playing as well as they are, the Rams, I don't think they were going to extend Jefferson. So I think he was expendable. And maybe he'll help Ridder a little bit. I mean, Ridder, we've criticized Ridder last week. One of our questions last week was, is Desmond Ridder, is he an NFL caliber starting quarterback? And the jury's still out. But this week was a good sign for him. Really, the first really good passing game he's had as a starting quarterback. So we're aligned on that one. Hopefully we won't have too many more answers where it's the same. So.
Hopefully not. Dave, you're usually you usually have the best stat here of the week. I always look forward to the ones that you bring to the show. What was your favorite Week 5 stat?
Yeah, I don't think I have a great one this week, and it's a bit of a homer one because it's from the Miami Dolphins. And that's that Devon Achane scored 7 touchdowns in the last 3 games.
Man.
He's only the second player in NFL history to have 7 touchdowns in his first 4 games, and but he's really done it in 3, because in his first game he got like 1 carry. Well, the first week he was a healthy scratch, and then week 2 he dressed, but he only touched the ball once, and then he had 4 touchdowns week 3, then 2, then 1. And I was trying to think of like the last time there was a rookie that was this much of a kind of everyone talking about him, and his highlights are all over the place. And I had to go all the way back to Randy Moss. Randy Moss's rookie year, 1998, he scored 17 touchdowns. And it was crazy. Like, it was Moss mania. He was, some fantasy leagues he wasn't drafted, and he was like a waiver wire guy, and other ones he was drafted. Most leagues he was drafted because he was a first round draft pick, but taken kind of late in drafts. People just didn't know. He was pretty unpolished is what people thought, and he had gone to Marshall, which is a smaller D1 school, where Chad Pennington was actually his quarterback for a couple of years. But anyway, like Randy Moss, I think, led the NFL at least in receiving touchdowns, maybe in total touchdowns, and he was just like a phenom everyone was talking about. And it's unfortunate that Achane has now gotten hurt and has gone on IR, because who knows when he'll be back and how much more he'll play this season. But in any case, that's my stat of the week: 7 touchdowns in over a 3-game span. There's a lot of guys in fantasy who are drafted in the first, say, 4 rounds who won't score 7 touchdowns this season. There's a whole bunch of them. I don't think Ramondre Stevenson's going to score 7 touchdowns this season. I don't think Chris Olave is going to score 7 touchdowns this season. And they might have good seasons. They just, I don't think 7 touchdowns. And Achane did it in 3 games. I mean, it's just,
absurd.
It's absurd. So that's my stat of the week. What is your favorite stat from week 5?
So I don't know. I mean, these are, of course, stats. I don't know how interesting they are, but it's crazy to me. We saw in week 4, the Cowboys handed Bill Belichick his largest margin of defeat by 35. And then in week 5, he loses by 34. And in both games combined, their offense scores a total of 3 points, Dave. I mean, what is going on with the Patriots?
Yeah, it's we'll get to that, because that's a question later on down the show sheet. But
yeah,
that is also, I thought about writing that stat down, because this was his 499th game coaching, and so he's basically coached 500 games, and his 2 worst losses were like the last 2 out of 500.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is kind of nuts. So a team that went in a different direction this week, Joe Burrow and the Bengals. You talked about Jamar Chase earlier, but Burrow obviously also had a big game, because he was throwing those 3 touchdown passes and those 14 receptions, or 15, whatever it is that Chase had. They broke out in week 5. We've all been waiting for it. It was against a weaker opponent in the Cardinals. So can we now trust that the Bengals are kind of back to what we expected them to be this season, or was week 4 maybe a little bit of fool's gold with Burrow and Chase and that offense?
Personally, Dave, I don't think we should call Arizona a weak team. They play hard and they don't lay down for anybody. I feel like this is a good win by Cincinnati, and I think it's a win they can build off of personally.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, they did play some good good defenses early in the season in Cleveland and Baltimore, and really got completely shut down. So I don't know. I mean, look, if you have Burrow and Chase, you're going to start them almost every, pretty much Chase, obviously, every week. I'm sure there were some people who had Burrow and didn't play him this past week against Arizona. And now that's how it always works, right? In fantasy, you have a guy you used a high draft pick on, he gives you nothing the first 4 weeks of the season. And you're like, Kyle Pitts too. Not that Pitts totally went off. He didn't score, but, and then you're finally like, I can't do it anymore. I got to play this other guy because I'm getting nothing. And then the second you do that, the guy has a good game. And that's why fantasy football is so much fun. for everyone
Really.
because that happens. So I don't know. I need to see a little more from Cincy, but I certainly, if I was a Joe Burrow manager in fantasy, I would feel a lot better now. Not only because he put up good numbers, but he was moving around. He looked better. He was stepping into his throws. He was standing in the pocket. He wasn't getting rid of the ball in 1 second every time. So, he showed signs that he's kind of looked more like the Joe Burrow we've grown accustomed to the last couple seasons.
And ironically enough, Jamar Chase said he didn't want to see Joe Burrow until week 5 in the preseason. And here we are, week 5, and he had his
He
best game of
knew.
the season.
He knew, man. It's his college quarterback. He knows the guy.
So another person I'm sure people want to see a lot more of before they become a believer is Justin Fields. And Fields is coming off the 2 best passing games of his career back to back. He still isn't running that much. Is he back to being the top 10 automatic weekly fantasy start that he was for last year?
I think I would like to see him running more because the running gives him the floor. And last year, almost all of his production was rushing.
Yeah.
He had those like crazy games where he ran for like 150 plus yards and 2 touchdowns. If your quarterback does that, it's like you're starting 2 players, a running back
Right.
and a quarterback. He's done it the last 2 weeks against pretty weak defenses in Denver and Washington. So I'd like to see him do it against better defenses, but if I have Justin Fields, I'm feeling pretty good about rolling him out there right now, and especially with him leaning on DJ more and more. That's the guy he should be throwing to. Cole Kmet has 3 TDs in the last 2 weeks. That's a good option too.
Right.
It was they lost Khalil Herbert this last week, but they do have 3 running backs. So I haven't looked at their schedule past this week where they're playing the Vikings, and he's a must start against the Vikings this week, just with the way he's playing and with the way the Vikings are playing. And I think this was a good time of the season for him to play 3 weak defenses in a row, because that can just give him confidence and some momentum. I mean, it's hard to erase from my mind how bad he looked throwing the ball early in the season. But like last year, he was droppable after 4 or 5 weeks, and then all of a sudden he went off. So maybe this is the pattern. And I think you can go back to starting him with a lot of confidence. What do you think?
Yeah, like you, Dave, I need to see him do it again before he gets the top 10 tag from me, but he's really not that far off. The fact that he's had back-to-back top 5 weeks and he's done it without rushing TDs, that says a lot for me.
Yeah. No, he's definitely looks good throwing the ball, which we've never really seen before. Because like I said, even last year when he was putting up big fantasy numbers, it was mostly with his legs, and then like an occasional touchdown pass thrown in and some yardage points for passing. And there he was scoring 25 to 30 fantasy points several weeks. You mentioned earlier your stat of the week was the obliteration of the Patriots over the last 2 weeks. And, they've benched Mac Jones in consecutive games late in the game with them getting destroyed. But they're sticking with him, at least to start again this week at the Raiders. Like you said, they've managed only 3 points the last 2 weeks. Are they the worst offense in football? And at this point, are they a complete stay away for fantasy purposes? Like, are you starting any Patriot, even Ramondre Stevenson, at this point on your fantasy team?
Well, I know the Patriots, they face the Saints, who are a good defense, and the Cowboys, who, have looked to be an elite defense. So I don't want to be too harsh on them, but man, this is easily the worst offense in football and is a must stay away for fantasy players. I mean, Ramondre Stevenson, even in the games where they were doing something, hasn't done much of anything. So I don't see who you can feel comfortable starting on this Patriots offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you have Ramondre, you probably used a third or fourth, like a third round pick on him.
Yeah,
And you might not have a better RB2 than him, and you might have to start him. And I think in full PPR, if they can get back to kind of, throwing to him a lot, using him kind of the way, I'm not saying he can catch passes quite like Alvin Kamara, but Ramondre had a lot of catches last year. Like, he
about
had,
70. I believe.
yeah, he had about 70 catches. And, that if he can do that, he doesn't necessarily need to have a ton of rushing yards or rushing touchdowns to at least be playable in fantasy. So I think if you have Ramondre, you probably have to start him. You probably don't have a better option, but you can't start anything in the passing game, at least not until you see it. And this is just a mess, and it's so strange to see a Patriots team. And especially, look, last year they had like two defensive coordinators running the offense, but they brought back Bill O'Brien. And,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people thought that was like such a big upgrade that this offense would go back to looking good, and Mac Jones would kind of play like he did his rookie year when he showed more promise than really. I mean, Trevor Lawrence, there was such a bad situation with Urban Meyer. Like, Lawrence gets a pass. But Mac Jones looked better than Zach Wilson. He looked better than Justin Fields, and he played better than Trevor Lawrence rookie year. Trey Lance didn't really play. He went from looking like the best quarterback in that class, or at least among the best, to now looking like the worst other than Trey Lance, who's on the Cowboys sideline. So, yeah, it's a mess there in New England, and as a Dolphin fan, I'm here for it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So the Jaguars, they handled the Bills and London in Week 5. How much of that was because of the travel advantage, or are they on a similar level as Buffalo in your eyes?
They've played the Bills. There was that game a couple years ago when the Jaguars were like a bad team and they beat the Bills 9-6. I think that was 2 years ago. I think they kind of match up well against them. Their defense does. I'm not really sure why. I do think that being in London for the whole week was an advantage for them. Plus the
Yeah.
Bills were coming off kind of an emotional big division win over the Dolphins. The Bills lost Matt Milano, outside linebacker Matt Milano, early in this game, and he's kind of the heart and soul of that defense in a lot of ways. And they lost Tre'Davious White the week before.
Right.
Well, I'm willing to kind of write off this game a little bit with all of those factors. I mean, there's no excuses really in football. This wasn't a game the Bills had to have, and it was a tough travel excursion for them, and a big advantage for the Jaguars already being there for a week and adjusting to the time, and not having to play an early what's essentially a really early morning game if you're coming from the United States. So, I don't think the Jaguars, and it was reflected in our power rankings, I don't think the Jaguars are as good as the Bills. It was obviously a huge win for them, though. And I think they're certainly, they're probably a playoff team, and the Bills are probably a playoff team. So maybe they'll meet in the playoffs, not in London, and we'll see who's better. What do you think?
No, like you, I think travel had a major impact for sure. Jacksonville stayed in London, like you mentioned, so they had the advantage there. I don't think Jackson is on Buffalo's level just yet, but I also don't think they're that far off.
Yeah, they're a good all-around team. And like I said when we were talking about our players of the week, the fact that they were able to run the ball on the Bills the way they did was surprising to me. Again, Milano went out of the game, and he's a big part of their run defense. But that surprised me. It surprised me that they were able to control the clock like that on the Bills. Another team that's 3-2 that I don't know how they're 3-2 is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Through 5 games, they have 70 first downs and 6 offensive touchdowns. You could have those numbers and be 0-5 or 1-4, but they're 3-2. It's kind of like the usual Mike Tomlin. Why are they 3-2? But They're over 500. A lot of people picked them to make the playoffs before the season. Their offense has been abysmal, including Kenny Pickett, who mostly has not been good this year. Are they a playoff team?
No, man. Unless they make a change on offense, this team is not a playoff caliber team. Mike Tomlin is just an amazing head coach, and even despite Matt Canada has found a way to win 3 games with this putrid offense, but really good defense. But no, I mean, with an offense like that, I mean, only 6 touchdowns and 70 first downs. That's I don't know, man. That's hard to believe.
Yeah, no, and I always sort of pencil in these Steelers, like the post Ben Roethlisberger Steelers, to be like 9-8, and they always are. But I don't think 9-8 gets a wild card in the AFC this year. So I think unless they can get to 10 or 11 wins, it's going to be tough. And that AFC North is tough because those teams are all capable of playing really well, and they're all just going to beat up on each other, literally and figuratively. And I think that's going to make it hard for there to be like 3 teams that come out of that division, even though maybe 3 of the best 7 are there. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, Dave, here we are, the Thursday night segment, and leave it to Thursday Night Football to be one of the grosser matchups of the week. And this week we have the Detroit Broncos and the Kansas City Chiefs. In years past, you'd be pretty excited as a fantasy player to watch this game. But looking at it this week, is there any reason to watch this game?
The only reason to watch this game is if you got fantasy players going, because there could be some points in this. There will be points in this game. The question is, will they all be from Kansas City?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess there's 2 reasons to watch the game. One is for fantasy purposes. Well, for some people 3, because another one is Taylor Swift is going to presumably be there, and there's that whole circus, which I'm pretty tired of personally. And then the third one is just to see, the ongoing disaster of how much in draft capital and money Denver gave to get Russell Wilson and Sean Payton, and how bad they are with those 2 guys. And it's not, Russ has actually played okay this year, but that's just been a horror show, that team, a train wreck. Do you think there's a reason to watch this game beyond anything I mentioned?
Yeah, only for the reasons that you mentioned. Unless you're a degenerate or fantasy sicko, I don't think this game needs to be watched.
Fair enough. Well, Miami put up 70 on Denver. And the Broncos are like across the board near the bottom in almost every defensive category. What do you think is a realistic point total for the Chiefs this week?
Oh man, that's a good question, Dave. Kansas City's offense has been good, not great. There are still questions at wide receiver, and Travis Kelce's injured. I'd be surprised if they put up 40 or more points.
Yeah, I wrote down 40. They put up 43 on the Bears, who are equally bad on defense. If Kelce doesn't play, I agree. It might be hard for them to get to 40. At the same time, I think the Chiefs need another really good offensive game just to get them going for when they play better teams, and they're at home. So I think this is, I think probably a big offensive performance is coming from them, because I don't think Denver can stop them. But you never know. Sometimes these Thursday night games never get to the high score you think they're going to get to, because NFL players just shouldn't be playing on 3 days rest,
Yeah, no, agreed there. You mentioned Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, and the Denver Broncos offense hasn't really been the big issue for their bad season. Another bright spot is the undrafted free agent running back Jaleel McLaughlin. Is he the best running back to have the rest of the season for fantasy purposes?
That's a good question. Javonte Williams practiced in full today, and I think the expectation is he's going to play this week. Now, I'm going to say with McLaughlin, I'm going to say yes, because I don't have confidence in Javonte Williams staying healthy and being able to stay on the field. A lot of times he's been hurt a lot early in his career. And a lot of times when you're coming back from the kind of major injury that he had, even when, and your whole knee has been reconstructed, you're just at risk of more injuries because you're overcompensating. Like we saw it with J.K. Dobbins a little bit. So, look, if Javonte stays healthy, then he's I think still going to be the lead back, and McLaughlin, I think they kind of like him to take some of that third down role that Samaje Perine was brought in to play, and some of the base work. But I think if Williams stays healthy, he'll get more carries, at least. So I don't know. This is one of those backfields that's maybe just kind of best to avoid until you see a little more clarity. What do you think about McLaughlin and Javonte and Samaje for that matter?
Yeah, you look at McLaughlin, and he's been excellent with his opportunities, and I feel like he has the perfect skill set for Sean Payton's offense. I do feel like he is the best running back for fantasy for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, that's fair. I picked him up in one league, and I started him last week. I don't know if I'll start him this week with Javonte back. It really depends on what your other options are. But if you have a guy who's questionable for Sunday and you're not sure if he's going to play, and McLaughlin is playing on Thursday night, then you might plug him in. So you mentioned that Travis Kelce with the ankle injury is iffy for this game, and it's a quick turnaround, and they don't really need Travis Kelce presumably to win this game. So I guess I'd be surprised if he plays, but he's a gamer. He's not missed a lot of games in his career before this season. So maybe he'll play. But regardless of whether he plays, this is a receiver core of many. Lot of guys. Is there any Chiefs wide receiver, even against a defense like Denver, that you feel confident starting in fantasy?
I do kind of like Rashee Rice, but to be honest, no. I am plugging in Sky Moore just to see if he'll take advantage of the opportunity and to see if he's worth holding on to in fantasy and dynasty, because he's been a big disappointment. I expected a lot of them. The Chiefs front office and coaching staff were kind of singing his praises all offseason, and I know the offense has been a work in progress, but we just really haven't seen him be able to take advantage of the opportunities he's been presented.
Yeah, I think this is a very frustrating wide receiver core that, I'm just avoiding in fantasy because, there's like 5 or 6 guys who are, all kind of getting like 30 to 40 to 50% snap share week to week. Mm-hmm. And no one's playing a ton except Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I think he leads them in snap share, but he just runs a lot of wind sprints, and doesn't really do that much with his snaps. He's a good blocker too. So I think that's part of why he's out there. But the rest of these guys, I do think Rashee Rice is the one who has shown maybe the most promise, and they're going to be touchdowns to be had. I just think it's such a guessing game, that you can't with a lot of confidence start any Chiefs wide receiver right now. That's even against bad opponents. Kelce and Pacheco are the 2 guys I want to start alongside Mahomes, and that's about it. Even Jerick McKinnon, who, had like that run of touchdowns last year, he's done nothing this year. If you have him, you can't start him either.
Yeah. It more than likely it's going to be a pretty lopsided game on Thursday night. A player that could take advantage of that is Russell Wilson, who's been the king of garbage time in 2023. He's 8th in quarterback points so far this season. Is he a strong start this week, Dave?
I saw a crazy stat the other day that if you just took Russell Wilson's 4th quarters and you projected that, you just, multiply that each game times 4 and then multiply that by the 17 games, he'd be on pace for a 6,000-yard season. So what's happening is the Broncos are falling behind in a lot of games, or they're in shootouts where it's close, like that Washington game and the Chicago game. The Chicago game, they blew a lead, but they're chasing points a lot. And, Russ is having a pretty good season throwing the ball, and he's getting garbage time stats, and that's why he's the QB8. I think that runs out maybe this week. Kansas City is a better defense than most of the defenses they've played. They can pressure him with Chris Jones and others. I think they get Nick Bolton back this week. They're very good middle linebacker, one of the top tacklers in the NFL last season. I'm a little. I don't think Russ is a bad start this week, but I have him ranked outside my top 12, so I don't have him as a QB1 this week. I think his performance will not be as good as it's been, even though the Broncos are going to be chasing points. That doesn't always translate. We've seen it with Daniel Jones a couple times this year, like that Seattle game. The Giants were way down, and Jones was just getting negative points by going out there and throwing interceptions. Or Dak last week. You would have thought maybe Dak would get some garbage time points, and he just threw late interceptions. So it doesn't always work that way when you're chasing points, and I think that might be one of these kind of games for Russ. What are you expecting from him this week?
Strong isn't the word that I would use for Russ this week. He's only had 2 20-point performances this season. I think he's a good start in Superflex, but outside of that, I wouldn't trust him.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the rest of the Week 6 slate, which thankfully there are a couple of other very lopsided games, like the Giants at Buffalo and the Jets and the Eagles, the Dolphins and the Panthers. There are a couple of what should be not very competitive matchups, but there's some good ones. So having talked about some of the worst games, what's your game of the week? What do you think is the best matchup in Week 6?
I mean, it has to be Dallas and the Chargers, right? On storylines alone, this will be made out to be the biggest game of the week. However, if Dallas's offense can bounce back, this game could be the high-scoring game of the week.
That's not the one I had written down. I have 2 other games that I'm just very interested in seeing this week. One is San Francisco at Cleveland, but only if Deshaun Watson plays. If Deshaun Watson doesn't play, then we saw what the Ravens did to the Browns 2 weeks ago with Deshaun not playing, and San Francisco's defense is better than the Ravens. I don't think it'll be that good of a game to watch. But I think if Watson plays, 2 really good defenses, it might be raining. It's a trap game a little bit for the 49ers. So, Cleveland has been good in a bunch of games this year. So there's that one. And I'm very interested in seeing Seattle at Cincinnati. I think that's a good matchup. 2 teams that made the playoffs last year. The Bengals trying to right the ship. The Seahawks have won 3 in a row. They were at a bye last week, but after losing that opening game to the Rams, they've won 3 in a row, destroyed the Giants in primetime, 2 weeks ago. So I think those are both very good matchups. And the Monday night game, the Dallas Charger game is also a good matchup.
Yes, sir. Of course, with every game of the week, we have the dud of the week. What's your game? What's your game dud of the prediction for this week?
For me, it's the Patriots at the Raiders, just because I think the Patriots are unwatchable at this point. The interesting thing about this game is you've got like Josh McDaniels, Jimmy Garoppolo, and Jacoby Myers all going up against their old team. So, kind of like the triple revenge game if you want to buy into. Sorry, I got a mosquito flying around me. So that's a catch.
Those are the worst.
Catch, man. One-handed
Mr.
catch.
Miyagi.
Like OBJ. I just – the Raiders are sometimes hard to watch too. That game does not interest me at all. Even though last year the craziest finish of any game last season was that Patriots-Raiders game where Ramondre Stevenson lateraled the ball, and then there was the throw back to Mac Jones, and he got hit by Chandler Jones and fumbled on the last play of regulation. So but I'm not interested in that game. What's your dud of the week?
We did it again, Dave. Patriots and Raiders, man. No interest in watching that at all for every reason he stated already.
Excellent. All right. You got a sneaky shootout game of the week this week?
I do, sir. I do. And it's Commanders versus Atlanta. Two teams with young quarterbacks, good defenses, and good pieces on offense. This will be a close game, I'd imagine. That could become a high-scoring affair in the blink of an eye.
Excellent. Mine is the Bears and the Vikings. I was really surprised to see the over under for this game only at 44.5 points. I would have thought it would be closer to 50. Neither one of these teams can play any defense.
Yeah.
I know Justin Jefferson's not going to play, and that's obviously hurts the Vikings a lot. But I'll be surprised if there aren't at least 48 points in this game. And this is one of those games I want to get fantasy guys in. I want to play both tight ends. I want to play, the starting running backs. I want the quarterbacks and several of the receivers, at least, Jordan Addison and DJ Moore for sure. So I think that's a sneaky shootout game for me, just because the defenses are bad.
Yeah, I think what I'm concerned with about with the Vikings is they can't run the ball very well, and then now they lose Justin Jefferson. I mean, I don't know. That'll be interesting to see how that offense runs. You looking sticking with Week 6 here? Which team has the biggest chance of pulling off an upset?
Yeah, I'm going to say Seattle getting 3 at Cincinnati. I know Cincinnati, if they can get it rolling, I mean, this is a team that has been to a Super Bowl and an AFC Championship game the last 2 years. But Seattle's coming off a bye, so they're rested. They've won 3 in a row, and they're getting 3 on the road. They should probably be getting a little more than that, just given the history of the Bengals the last couple of years. But I think the Bengals have really only played 1 good game this year. So maybe the line is right, but I like Seattle to win this one outright. Who do you think has the best chance of an upset this week?
Dave, give me the Buccaneers. I think Tampa presents an interesting matchup for the Lions, and the Lions defense has had tougher times with better offenses. One game they won by 1 single point against the Kansas City Chiefs, and the other game was an overtime loss against the Seattle Seahawks, where they gave up a lead late in the game. I like the Buccaneers this week.
Excellent. All right. Well, before we're running a little long tonight, but we still have our Week 6 fantasy segment to get to, so we'll go through these last couple questions. A lot of people were burned last week. They were very excited. Jonathan Taylor was back off IR. They plugged him into their lineups and watched Zach Moss against one of the best rushing defenses in the NFL just go ballistic.
Right.
So, and Moss also dominated touches. It wasn't just that he had a big game. He was getting the work. They're clearly going to ease Taylor back in. How are you handling the Colts backfield this week with their game against the Jaguars?
I would start Moss again and wait another week before starting Taylor. I think Indianapolis has no reason to rush JT back or force him to any touches. I mean, let him just find his groove and let him get acclimated back to the NFL speed of the game.
We are aligned. I don't have anything to add to that brilliant answer. You can't sit Moss down right now if you're the Colts. And we know it's going to be Gardner Minshew for the next 4+ weeks, which I think is good for their running backs because.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, I think that Richardson was going to get rushing touchdowns.
Right.
So I think that from a fantasy standpoint, the offense may not be as dynamic, may not score quite as many points, but the rushing is going to come from the running backs, not the quarterback and the running backs. So I think it's probably, overall a plus for them, assuming that Minshew plays well and the offense does well. But I agree with you. I would probably wait a week on Taylor. I know it's hard. You get Jonathan Taylor, like you're not putting him in your – and it's better to be a week late than a week early.
Right.
So that's kind of my thinking there.
Another interesting battle of the week is the 49ers at the Browns. And, you look at the elite defenses and there's an early forecast has a bad rainy weather game. How nervous are you about the leading fantasy producers in this game?
Yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, if Deshaun Watson doesn't play, I'm fading the entire Browns offense, like no
Yes,
Amari
yes,
Cooper,
yes.
probably no Jerome Ford. I would just avoid the whole thing. If Watson plays, then I think you can start Cooper, you can start Ford, you can start Njoku. None of them are high-end starts. You saw what the 49ers did to the Cowboys last week. But if the weather's particularly bad, outside of McCaffrey, I mean, you're starting Ayuk, Kittle, and Debo every week. It's just maybe temper expectations a little bit. The 49ers have gotten to 30 points every week this year. So that's one of the things I really want to see this week against that Browns defense. Can they get to 30? And especially on the road Cleveland's had more bad weather games than any team the last couple years. They've had a whole bunch of bad, rainy, windy games that kind of plays to their advantage and how they play football. So, like I said, I think if the weather's bad, that this could be a little bit of a trap game for the 49ers. Of course, Brock Purdy he's never lost a regular season game, so maybe he never will, and it's never going to happen. So the Saints have been. I want to talk about them for a second. They've been surprisingly pretty good. I thought about putting them in my top 10 actually, just because of how well in my power rankings, just because of how well their defense has played. Only two teams are allowing fewer points per game than them through this week 5. And the Texans kind of came back down to earth last week against the Falcons. I think you and I were both sort of surprised to see that after how well they had played against the Steelers and Jaguars the prior 2 weeks, kind of having blowout wins.
Right, right.
How do you feel about against that Saints defense? How do you feel about CJ Stroud and Dameon Pierce and Nico Collins and anyone else on the Texans rolling them out this week?
I know the Saints have a tough defense, but even with that being said, I feel good, not great about those players. I'd still start all of those guys, honestly. I would, and I am.
That's where I am. I'm a little nervous about them, but I don't think I'm benching any of them. Maybe Pierce if I have better options, because he really hasn't been that good. And for most people, Stroud is not their top quarterback. He's often the second best guy you have. So it really depends on matchups more than anything else.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of guys maybe we're concerned about, which highly ranked player is your fade of the week in fantasy?
So I'm going to go with a guy who really had a great game last week, and it was good to see how back he is, and that's Breece Hall. And if you have Breece Hall, you're starting him.
Yes.
But that Eagles defense, they've allowed the fewest fantasy points to running backs. They've only allowed one total touchdown to running backs. So they've allowed a rushing touchdown, no receiving touchdowns to the position. And they've allowed less than 300 yards, I think, in 5 games on the ground to running backs. The Jets just lost Elijah Vera Tucker for the season. He's their best offensive lineman.
Oh, geez.
And Zach Wilson, I know he's played better the last couple weeks, but I think if you're the Eagles, you kind of like say, okay, there's 2 guys we got to worry about, and it's Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, and we're not letting them beat us. And that front with Jalen Carter is really tough. I think Hall, he can always break a long one, and so you're not sitting him. But I'm a little worried about him this week. How about for you?
Yeah, for me, as the quarterback 12 on the week, I'm worried about Jared Goff. Tampa Bay is coming off a bye week, and they've allowed the least amount of passing touchdowns this season with 2 and only 4 total touchdowns to quarterbacks all season in 4 games. That's impressive. I'm a little worried about Jared Goff this week.
All right. I am too, especially because he's road Jared and home Jared are different guys. I do think he'll have Amon-Ra St. Brown back, which is huge for him. But
yeah, that's big.
But I hear you on. Well, he practiced, I think, in limited fashion today, so it's only Wednesday. But the fact that he was able to practice is good. He has an oblique injury, and whenever they say that, or abdominal, you worry it's like a sports hernia or something, and that he could be out for a while, but it doesn't sound like it's that. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. Which lower ranked player do you like as a sleeper this week in fantasy?
My sleeper for the week is Desmond Ridder. I like this matchup, and the quarterbacks average more than 20 points per game when facing the Commanders' defense. And Ridder is coming off his best performance of the season. I like his chances of having another big game this week. How about you, Dave?
I like that. I'll give you two receivers I like this week who are ranked outside the top 25, meaning they're not ranked as a wide receiver 1 or 2 this week. They're ranked more as a wide receiver 3 or flex, but I think they could give you sort of solid wide receiver 2, low end wide receiver 1 numbers. And that's Zay Flowers at the Titans, who, tend to struggle against the pass. And Jordan Addison against the Bears with Justin Jefferson out. Addison's already had some pretty big games. And I already said I like that game to be a sneaky shootout. I think Addison could easily go over 100 yards and give you a touchdown. So those are my sleeper calls.
I like that. All right, who will be the highest scoring player of the week?
So I was very tempted to kind of go with the chalk and just say either Patrick Mahomes in this tasty matchup against Denver, or Josh Allen in an equally tasty matchup against the Giants. But I think both of those games, there's a possibility that the scoring comes from other players. And if Kelsey doesn't play, I mean, look, those two are going to be among the high scorers this week. But I'm going to go with Justin Fields. He's just kind of got it going the last 2 weeks. The Vikings are a bad defense. And I think the game where Fields also has 100 yards on the ground and a touchdown is coming at some point, and I'll bet on it for this week. So he's my pick. Who's your guy?
Yeah, give me Justin Fields, quarterback facing the Vikings defense. Have finished as top 15 quarterbacks or better, except for 1 week when facing the Vikings defense.
All right. So let's move off the quarterbacks. Who's your highest scoring non-QB of the week?
I'll get a little wild here, and I'll go with Isaiah Pacheco. The Broncos defense is atrocious. I don't see Kansas City throwing the ball a lot this week, with Kelsey likely not playing. And Pacheco has 3 straight games with a rushing touchdown and 15 or more touches. How about you, Dave?
I'm going to go with Raheem Mostert. With Devon Achane not playing and the Dolphins playing a Panthers team that's 0-5 and is a little more vulnerable on the ground than they are through the air. And Mostert already has like 7 touchdowns on the season. He's a good goal line back. It's not like with Devon Achane not there, they're going to suddenly give Mostert the ball 30 times. They're not going to do that. That's not how they use him. It'll either be Jeff Wilson or Savon Ahmed or both of them. Spelling Mostert, but Mostert will get the first crack at it. He can score through the air too. So I like him to be the high scoring player of the week. And now we get to the most fun part of the show. The bold call of the week for week number 6. Paul, you go first.
My bold call, week 6 edition. Gardner Minshew has a revenge game and beats his old team, the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I'll add, he has more fantasy points than Trevor Lawrence.
That is bold. I'm going to go with a revenge call also in mine. And my revenge call is that Jimmy Garoppolo and Jacoby Myers are going to hook up for not 1, but 2 touchdowns this week. It's funny. Remember when Myers went that whole season? He set the record for the most catches without a touchdown. He already has 3 this year, and he missed a game. And believe it or not, he's the most targeted player in the NFL inside the 10-yard line this year. And what's even crazier than that is the second most is Devontae Adams, who's on the same team. So clearly when the Raiders get close, Jimmy G throws to both of those guys. And so that's my bold call. Jimmy G to Jacoby Myers in Bill Belichick's right in his face for 2 touchdowns.
I like that, man. I like that a lot. Now, we weren't Super Bowl, but I think we were interesting.
Yeah, well, we both went with some revenge stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm not going to pick, the Giants to beat the Bills. I'm not going to pick the Panthers to beat the Dolphins. I'm not going to pick the Broncos to beat the Chiefs.
Right.
And outside of that, there aren't, that many big betting lines this week. So I don't know. I like to usually make my bold calls more about individual players than just picking a huge upset. But
Yeah, I hear that.
but you picked an upset, so I like yours.
Yes, sir. Well, Dave, man, we got into a lot this week, man. You took care of the show sheet and you did a great job, so I appreciate you doing that this week.
I'm happy to do it. I like writing the show sheet. I think there's just a lot to cover, when we get this deep into the season. I like to try to touch on as many teams as we can. I think we probably, over the course of the show, I'm hoping we mentioned every team in the NFL. When I listen to the show tomorrow, I'll see if we left, if there was a single team we didn't mention even once. But hopefully we mentioned each team.
Yeah, hopefully. Well, Dave, as always, I enjoyed our discussion tonight. Before we get you out of here, remind the people they can find you on Twitter and what content they can expect from you this week.
Yeah, excellent. I'm at Pigskin Papers. My website is thepigskinpapers.com. I've already got a waivers column out from earlier in the week, and tomorrow, sometime probably early afternoon, I'll post my weekly fantasy preview. Paul, where can people find you on Twitter?
Yes, guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. And as far as content goes, you can expect the Cowboys show previewing the matchup versus the Los Angeles Chargers with a guest. So that'll be interesting. And I believe if my co-hosts are interested, we might do a Charger sneak peek because they play on Monday night. Typically, that's when we do our recap show of the game prior. So maybe instead of trying to cover that game next week, we can do a sneak peek and a preview into that game.
Excellent.
Well, guys, as always, man, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see y'all next week.
Night, everyone.